Now then guys, welcome back to Range 23. My name's Bob, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at another optic from Vortex's lineup, but this one's a little bit less LPVO and a little bit more HOLO. That was terrible, I'll definitely cut that. That's right, it's the Vortex AMG UH-1 Gen 2 holographic sight. This one has kindly been sent in for review by one of my viewers, Dan. So big thanks to him, he's just earned himself a Range 23 Superfan badge. It's a very exclusive club, guys. There's currently only two members, Dan and my mum. But anyway, let's get straight into it. So just quickly, for anyone who maybe doesn't know, a holographic sight differs from a traditional red dot in the way that it produces the reticle that our eyes see, whereas a traditional red dot has an LED emitter which projects an image onto a single lens, and that's what our eyes pick up. The holographic sight has a laser emitter which splits off to a series of like splitters and reflectors and kilometer lenses and things, and that creates that holographic image inside the sight. One isn't necessarily better than the other in general. They both have their pros and cons. Red dots are generally much easier to make. The technology is simpler, which means it can be lighter weight and usually cheaper. Holographic sights tend to be much more difficult to make, hence a bit more expensive. They're generally a bit bigger and bulkier as well. They don't have anywhere near as good a battery life as a red dot, but you generally do get a slightly better image quality out of it, much clearer glass, that type of thing, bigger field of view. Okay guys, enough about that. This isn't a red dot versus holographic sight video, that's a whole other topic. We're here to talk about the AMG Huey, and in this video I'm going to be comparing it quite heavily to the EoTech EXPS3, their flagship holographic optic, because realistically that's kind of, I think, what the Huey is kind of aimed at in the marketplace. It's aimed as an EoTech rival. It's kind of the closest option to it as well. So yeah, we'll be making a lot of comparisons to that. But let's get straight into it and take a look at the Huey. So let's start with its design, and the first thing you're going to notice about this is it is chunky with a capital C. There is no missing that on your rifle, is there? I mean, holographic sights generally have to be a bit bigger and bulkier than red dots anyway, just to house that emitter setup in there. And this one's actually, it's not quite as high or quite as wide as the EoTech, but it is a little bit longer. And also this, obviously, side profile, you've got this this lens housing here. It does run the full length, so it comes with a hell of a side profile. You ain't missing that if it's on someone's gun. And the other interesting thing to note as well is, unlike the EoTech, which has that aluminium hood over it, this doesn't have that. There's no kind of protective foreskin over this. Nothing to stop that housing being bashed. But it does mean that you get a slightly larger window size, and more on that later. And with all that size comes weight. This thing is weighing in at a hefty 11.7 ounces. That's a little bit more than the EoTech, which is sitting at 11.2. The UH-1 is made in the US of A, and the holographic assembly is actually made right here in the UK. So besides being a bit of a whopper, what else can we say about the design of the UH-1? Well, I actually quite like it. This Gen 2 has got lightning cuts in the profile, which I think really help to bring some character to the optic over the Gen 1. The laser markings are minimal and clean, not overbearing at all like certain other optics. We've got an inbuilt QD mount. It's nice and sturdy with a nice lock-in tab. It sits the optic at a lower 1/3 core witness as well, so you'll be able to rely on sights in conjunction with this if that's your thing. But interestingly enough, that QD mount is actually a separate piece to the main optic body, similar to something like an Elkin Spectre. It's fixed by a single screw at the rear that allows the optic body to pivot independently of the mount, and that is how the windage is adjusted on this optic. Speaking of that, the windage and elevation adjustments are very clearly marked for directions and the increments. Adjustments are both nice and tactile. And whilst the windage is an external mechanism adjustment, the elevation is a much more traditional internal adjustment. On the left side, there's our battery compartment. The sight runs on a single CR123A battery and has a battery life of up to 1500 hours, allegedly. The cap's got a little folding plastic tab for ease of access. It's also tethered by a small wire, which is a nice touch, very similar to the EoTech. So no chance of losing it in the field if you're changing batteries. Again, it's nicely marked up with the battery type and the orientation as well. And on the rear of the sight, we've got our controls. Nice big plus and minus buttons with a night vision button in the middle. They're all nice and bold and big, and the presses are quite audible and quite tactile even when using gloves. And finally, underneath, you've got all your serial numbers and all that boring stuff. You'll also notice on this sight there's a red tint to the front lens, which is pretty unusual for a holographic optic. Again, more on that later. The reticle is Vortex's EBR CQB. It has an advertised 1 MOA centre dot with a 65 MOA outer ring. It's very similar to a standard EoTech donut of death, but the outer circle is now segmented and we've got a big bold triangle at the 6 o'clock position for targets that are inside of 7 yards or so. The UH-1's reticle has 15 daylight brightness settings and 8 night vision settings. That's a pretty respectable amount of settings, not quite as many as the EoTech, but still more than most red dots. It'll also return to the previously selected daylight setting or night vision setting when you switch in between modes, which is cool. And the night vision button has to be held down for a second or two to switch modes, so there's no worry about accidentally switching it out when you're out and about with this thing. The Optic has an auto shut off of 14 hours, but this can be disabled if needed. As well, the UH-1 comes with Vortex's VIP warranty, which as we all know is industry leading, so you've got total peace of mind whether you're buying this thing new or used. That really can't be understated for this optic. And something else, guys, I'm not going to go into price really in this video because things are a little bit wild at the minute and prices are up and down. Well, they're up massively, to be honest. Certainly in the UK they've gone through the roof, but hopefully that'll settle down soon. So all I can say is make sure you shop around and do your research, guys. So we've had a look at the specs and features of the UH-1, but what's it actually like to shoot with? Well, to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. When I first mounted this up, I was really impressed with it. I really like the look of it. It seems really well built. But the more time I spent with it, the more it kind of gradually dipped down in my estimations. And don't get me wrong, it's still a very good sight, but it's got a lot of things going for it as well. You know, it's certainly compared to a lot of red dots. But if we're comparing it to that EXPS3, it does fall a little bit short. So we'll start with the good points, and the first one has to be that big window, that big field of view. Like I said earlier, this is bigger than an EoTech, which is already one of the biggest out there. Really like this feature. It's lovely to present onto this gun. You've got bags of room there. A lot of people say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter with a reflex style red dot sight because you should have both eyes open anyway. And that's true to a certain degree, but when you start shooting more dynamically, you competition guys will know, head placement, you don't always get the best head placement if you're shooting weak shoulder, if you're shooting through barricades, round corners, that type of thing. And that's where that big window really comes into its own there. You know, you're not getting that good sight alignment on the gun, you're not getting that good head position. This is a lot more forgiving than something like an Aimpoint micro footprint sight. I know just from my experience with it, presenting like weak shoulder, I always seem to be able to get onto the reticle, you know, somewhere, and then even if you're not quite central, your mind naturally centers it into the window there. So yeah, really good feature that. Another one is the amount of brightness settings you get with this. Like I say, 15 daylight settings and 8 night vision settings. I haven't been able to test the night vision settings because I'm only a poor Yorkshireman. But the daylight settings are great. There's 15 of them, like I say. You can always seem to find the right one for the conditions. And as well, they're really well incremented, really consistently incremented as well, which is another good feature. A lot of optics, you'll be going up and all of a sudden you'll just get a massive jump to like maximum brightness, and it's a bit overwhelming, but this seems to space them out really well. And other things as well, I think it's designed really well. I think it feels sturdy, it feels solid. I like the mount, even with the adjustment on the windage there. That feels nice and solid, it's not going anywhere. I really like the little tab on the battery housing there to get in and out and makes getting access into there an absolute breeze. That's a really nice, clever little design feature. Lastly, the reticle, like I say, very similar to an EoTech reticle, big fan of that. It magnifies really well, it sharpens up under magnification, and that little triangle at the bottom could possibly be a little bit more intuitive for those close range shots as well. So yeah, I think those are all good things with this optic. Right. So now let's look at some of those negatives, and the first one has to be that big window size. the reticle doesn't actually appear across the full area of that glass. There's about 10% around the bottom and the top and the sides that the reticle will just disappear in. So whilst you can still look through the glass, if you move the reticle all the way to the side, you'll see in the top and the right and the bottom it seems to disappear. However, the left hand side, it seems to go almost all the way to the housing. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but it's definitely a negative, certainly when you're coming from shooting an EoTech, which projects the reticle right to the edges of the glass there. And another negative with that big window is that the glass is coated, hence that red tint to it, just like a red dot, LED red dot sight. So you do get that blue kind of tint to the glass when you're looking through it. It's not a massive issue. I shoot with red dots all the time. It doesn't cause a distraction or anything like that, certainly not when you're shooting. It's just a little bit odd coming from EoTechs again, where they've got such clear glass, no distortion, great light transmission, great colour reproduction. It's a bit of an odd choice. I'm not sure why Vortex did it. I can only imagine it's for like battery savings, for having a slightly lower powered emitter or something like that potentially, to reflect that red colour more. But yeah, again, just an odd choice, and I do think it's a negative. Certainly when you're using a magnifier with this, you do notice that blue tint a little bit more. At low light, it doesn't transmit as much light. I've noticed at kind of dusk times. I have not, like I say, not shot this with night vision, but watching a couple of reviews of guys who use this with night vision, they do say the light transmission through it is pretty poor, certainly even compared to a lot of red dots out there. So just something to bear in mind, that, guys. And whilst the UH-1 does magnify really, really well, the button placement isn't ideal for use with a magnifier. Obviously, been at the back there, as soon as you mount the magnifier up behind it, it restricts access to them buttons. It means you've got to flip it over to change any settings, to flip it then back. It's something the EoTech had sorted like years ago, like a decade ago with the EXPS3, having them on the side there. Not a deal breaker by any means, it's just more of a little annoyance really. But for me, the biggest annoyance with the UH-1 has to be the way this thing handles its brightness adjustment. Unlike a lot of other optics out there, when you change the brightness, it changes the output current to the unit. What the UH-1 does is alter the refresh rate. So as you drop the brightness, it decreases the refresh rate. As you up the brightness, it increases the refresh rate. And what that leads to is reticle stutter, whereby when you're transitioning with the rifle, when you swing into the next target, in your view, the reticle appears choppy. It appears to kind of come and go, but stutters basically. Imagine you've got a mouse cursor on a PC screen and you drag it across the screen back and forth really fast, and you get that choppy kind of, you see multiple images, it breaks up. It's the same as that basically, but with your reticle. I'm not sure really why Vortex have done that. It was actually that bad that when I was filming the first person view through this optic with my camera, I had to have the optic set on absolute maximum brightness or the camera would pick up the stutter. Even on second to max brightness, that reticle would be flickering. And you can see it here on screen, the refresh of that reticle. Now don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as bad as this to the human eye. You certainly don't see it like the camera does. The camera's picking up at 60 frames a second. I think your eye sees it something like 24, 25 or something like that. So it's nowhere near as bad as that to the human eye. It's mainly under movement, but it is definitely there, certainly at them lower brightness settings. And like I said, whilst it doesn't make the optic unusable or anything like that, it's more of an annoyance. It just makes the optic feel cheap. So like I say, a bit of a mixed bag. The UH-1's got its good points, but I think they're outweighed by those bad points. It's a shame really, because I really want to like the UH-1. I think the market needs a good EoTech alternative, but the UH-1 just falls that little bit short. You know, if you're going to bring a sight to market to compete with EoTech, it needs to be as good, if not better than EoTech. And I don't think that the Vortex is, if I'm honest. I feel like they've made some bad design decisions when they've been building this as well. I feel like they've really chased that battery life issue. And whilst they've succeeded, don't get me wrong, the Vortex has an advertised 1,500 hours of battery life versus the EoTech's advertised 1,000 hours. So they've definitely got more battery life out of the unit. But I don't feel like that's the win they think it is. In order to get that extra battery life, they've had to compromise a lot of what people expect from a holographic sight. You know, instead of that lovely, crisp, clear glass with that great colour representation and decent light transmission, we've got coated lenses, a blue tint, poor light transmission. You know, we don't have that nice, solid EoTech reticle, that holographic reticle. We've now got a real stuttery reticle as well. I feel like they're just poor decisions. And let's be honest, guys, nobody's buying a holographic sight for the battery life, are they? If you're concerned about battery life, you're going to be buying a red dot sight. You're going to be getting tens of thousands of hours of battery life, or you're going to be buying an Reticle or a prism sight or something like that. Nobody's doing it for the battery life. Now, with all that said, I actually don't think this is a bad sight at all. It's more than usable. It's got a lot of great features for it. There's just one or two issues there that let it down slightly, certainly compared to those EoTechs. I really wish Vortex had released like a Gen 3 which would resolve those issues. Even if it means lowering that battery life, I think it'd be worth it to give EoTech a run for the money and get, you know, something else in the market space. There's a lot of untapped potential with this sight, so yeah, maybe in the future we'll see something better coming from this. Right then guys, that's just about all I've got for you today. Thank you very much for watching as always. If you've enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a big like, big thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've just gone over 1,000 subscribers, which has blown me away. I never thought I'd get to 100, never mind 1,000. So I don't know, maybe I'll do a giveaway. That's what people do in it. I'll do some kind of giveaway. I'm only a poor Yorkshireman, so maybe it'll be a lump of coal or a flat cap or something. I don't know, but I'll do something to celebrate. If you've got any questions or any comments, or you just want to troll me as usual, just get down in the comments and go wild. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.